Last time we talked about uh, warrants. So we'd already introduced the concept of a fact. A fact is something that's independently verifiable. It's not the kind of thing you have to hold in your mind and get someone else to think up in their mind. It's something you can independently verify. You don't have to take somebody's word for it. But we never just look at the facts by themselves. We always make inferences by hear sort of a loud tone coming through the loudspeaker of the room here. I'll assume that's a fire alarm, and I'll make the inference that we're supposed to go outside. Then we'll generalize facts because when we come across a new fact, we're always looking for some category to put it in order to know what inferences to make. So we'll speak about TAMU CC students, and we can make generalizations about you and say, well, TAMU CC students are different than TAMU Kingsville students or A&M students in College Station. We can say Americans are different than Canadians. A lot of times these generalizations are just very, very simplistic. But in order to know how to function in a world where we don't know everybody individually, we have to make these generalizations. But the inferences that we make are usually based on inference rules, like sort of generalizations about what inferences to make when you come across individual facts. And those we'll call a warrant. In formal logic, that'll be called a major premise. So a minor premise is like a specific fact, specific situation. A major premise is a larger generalization that we use to interpret that minor premise, that specific situation. You can think of it as the chain that connects the data to the conclusion, to the judgment. We don't make the judgment unless we know the particular warrant to apply to that particular data. For example, going back to the Dreyfus affair, one of the minor premises, one of the specific facts that the prosecution brought against Captain Dreyfus was that he was overheard making positive statements about the German military. He's working for French military intelligence and he's saying good things about their enemy, their past and soon to be future enemy, the Germans. Well, that must be an indication that he was the one who wrote that spy letter to the Germans that was discovered. But the major premise there, the warrant that leads us from that specific fact to that conclusion is that, well, if you say some positive thing about somebody, you must approve of everything about them. And we sort of found an alternative warrant to add to that fact. I might overhear him say positive things about the German military, but the warrant I might add to that is, well, he's military intelligence for France, and his goal is to make sure France is actually prepared for an enemy they might be underestimating. So I can think of an alternative warrant for that, but this is the warrant that the prosecutors seem to presume. And you will see this today where, if you say something like, oh, this scientist discovered this thing, and that thing was good, and somebody else says, oh, but that scientist also said some terrible things about other people. And so by saying he was good in one area, you must be assuming he's good in all areas. That's kind of the same problem here. But we can say that, yes, I don't dispute the fact that he said something positive about the Germans. I just dispute the warrant that leads us to a condemnation. I would use a different warrant there. But the examples I used last time are mostly negative. Like if you identify that warrant, you'll see the problem with the argument. But we have to have some warrant. And a lot of these warrants are going to have a lot of times, they're good heuristics. They're like I before E except after C. They're rules that will lead us to the right conclusion a lot of the time. But they're heuristics. They're not permanent rules that are always going to be accurate. So I can point to the Dreyfus affair and say, well, this is a good example of people using the wrong kind of judgment, but then I'm going to replace it with a different kind of judgment. I can point to the facts that, well, there was no substantive evidence against him. Also that he was Jewish at a time when France was almost entirely Christian or non-religious, but they saw Jewish people as somehow a different, almost like a different nationality. And his investigators were openly anti-Semitic. Even Lieutenant Colonel Picard made an anti-Semitic statement when Dreyfus was stripped of his badges. And so those facts I can point to and say, well, he should not have been presumed guilty the way he was. And the major premise I'm using there is no one should be presumed guilty of a crime based solely on ethnicity or religion. So there's going to be good warrants, there's going to be bad warrants, there's going to be a lot of warrants that are kind of in between. And that's why I wanted you to listen to this podcast by these two guys, Tristan Harris and Aza Raskin. We'll be hearing more from them later in the semester. In fact, next week, I think, when we talk about definitions. But they're two computer tech, people that are, well known in the tech industry, but they a few years ago decided to start looking at how social media was changing the way people interacted with each other, the sort of emotional well-being of people who spent most of their life on social media. And now they're sort of turning their investigation to artificial intelligence and the role it's going to have and already having. But in this podcast, they look over some commonly used warrants. They call them values in this. We're going to distinguish values from other kinds of things. So the name of this particular podcast was How Zombie Values Infect Society. But what they're talking about here is these sort of general assumptions that aren't just about what's good and bad, but also about cause and effect, about definition and that kind of thing. And these warrants that they mention, they're sort of general principles that you can apply to different situations. And you might look at them and say, how can anybody dispute that? Isn't that a good thing? And their point is not that it's never a good thing. And it's not that it's not always, or that it's not most of the time a good thing. It's just that it's not always a good thing, even though we tend to presume it's always a good thing. So they talk about, well, if there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of people say, well, don't try to regulate speech. Don't inflict, don't harm our freedom of speech. Instead, the answer to misinformation is accurate information. So let's have more speech so that the people who are telling the truth can debate the people who are spreading misinformation, and then other people will see the difference there. This is something we're going to come back to a lot when we look at free speech issues, both on college campuses and then more globally online. But it's one of those that's sort of built into our identity as Americans. It's in the First Amendment. Again, it's an interpretation of the First Amendment, but it's the one that is consistently affirmed by court rulings and that sort of thing over the past centuries, 2 centuries. But they're pointing out that at the time that freedom of speech was sort of championed, it was sort of fought for, it was really hard to generate speech. You had freedom of the press if you owned a press, a printing press. You could potentially write letters and have influence people, but now we're in the exact opposite situation where everybody in here is sitting in a computer, and you probably got another computer in your purse or in your pocket, and you might even have another laptop in front of you. And so we have a whole lot of printing presses. We can all generate information and distribute it around the world instantly. Now, we used to have a lot of time to sit back and read the few things that were out there. But now, because there's so much out there, we don't have time to read everything. We can't sort of function in our normal lives without being bombarded with information. In fact, you can't read the information you want to read or watch the video you want to watch without more information, like pop-up windows, advertisements, cutting into the middle of the video and that kind of thing. And other people competing for our attention against the thing that we actually want to pay attention to. So obviously more speech doesn't mean the same thing now as it did then. So we're in a different situation, a different rhetorical situation now than Thomas Jefferson was, when he, and others drafted the Bill of Rights and included the First Amendment to protect freedom of speech. And when it comes to false information, well, we can just fact check. There's a lot of people out there that are really dedicated to, if you go to factcheck.org or a lot of these other fact-checking websites, you'll not only see when they analyze something somebody says or a meme that's out there or something somebody believes, but you'll see their whole methodology. How did they go test that assertion? What facts did they gather? And how did they come to the judgment they came to? They're going to be very sort of rigorous about showing you how they came to the decision. They're not just going to rank something as true or false. They're going to show you how they came to that decision. So then you yourself will see, that they are being transparent. But that takes a lot of time. We talked about the bullshit asymmetry principle last week, where saying something that you don't necessarily know is false, but you don't know it's true either. That's really easy, and generating it's really, really easy and quick. But to debunk something like that takes a lot of time, a lot more time than it does to generate it. So just fact checking is not going to solve the problem. Misinformation can go a lot further, a lot faster. But again, fact checking is good. They're not saying that's a bad thing. They're not saying we shouldn't try to get fact checking to keep up with misinformation. maybe, that's something AI can do because AI can do the fact checking a lot faster. We want to make sure it's transparent. We want to know how the AI came to the decision that this thing is false or this thing is true. But that could at least help, the fact checkers keep up. But again, by itself, this warrant, that the solution to misinformation is just fact checking, is not always going to hold up. Things like informed consent is required, so people should be asked for the consent before, you go to, send a text message, and then you get that little pop-up window saying like, Apple's terms of service have changed, click here to go back to doing the thing you were just going to do. Are you going to read through that whole terms of service change? Have you ever read through the terms of service for your cell phone? And we're bombarded with this all the time, like just to communicate back and forth with the school where my daughter is. I thought I could just when it came time to registering or signing up for a teacher conference and stuff like that, I should just, be able to say what times you have available and I'll pick one. But they want you to use an app to do that. They won't do it themselves. And to download that app, you have to do another terms of service thing where they're going to share your information. And it's really vague and really legalistic terms. And I'm just trying to set up a parent-teacher conference with my daughter's teachers, and I can't do that without one of these terms of service things. All kinds of things consistently that we have to use, these tools that we have to use to interact, like Duo Mobile, stuff like that, that you have, if you want to even, interact with the school system, even with your own hardware, even with your own computer and phone, you've got to have Duo Mobile to sign in and all this kind of thing. So it's really easy to say, hey, you signed that contract, you clicked I accept to our terms of service, you gave us your informed consent. But are you really informed? Are you really responsible for understanding the legalistic language that is, often intentionally vague and something you have to deal with, just like misinformation, something we have to deal with quickly. That value, that warrant makes sense in some cases. You sign a contract for buying a house or something, you will spend time looking over all the every clause of that, and maybe get somebody who's more of an expert in this kind of thing to look over it. But we don't have time to do that with every single digital terms of service agreement we click on. Everything should be democratized. That sounds good, right? Everybody should have access to these resources. Everybody should be able to speak their mind. Everybody should be able to defend themselves. Everybody should be able to have a place in society, this kind of thing. So democratizing means not just vote, if we think of democracy as voting, but the demos in democracy means the people. So democracy, as opposed to aristocracy, is ruled by the upper class. Democracy is ruled by all the people. But if we democratized everything, if we democratize nuclear weapons or biological weapons, if people had the ability to find DNA code for a virus that could wipe out life on Earth, and when as sort of our printers, quote unquote, become more and more able to print things at a sort of nano level. What about when just some random person, who just hates the world, instead of getting a gun and going to a shopping mall, they can now print out a virus that can infect everybody on the planet? Do we really want to democratize that? Where 999,999 people out of 1 million won't use that kind of technology, but now that it's available to 1 million people, one person might. So yeah, everybody having access, everybody having the ability to do a lot of things is great, until just that one person in 1 million decides to use it for the wrong way. And people have agency over their own willpower when making choices. So in other words, this is another way of saying you're responsible for your own actions. And of course you're responsible for your own actions. Well, what about when your action was following too close to the car in front of you? You say, okay, well, I need to keep 3 car lengths if I'm going at this speed, so I'm going to back up a bit. And then somebody cuts in front of you, and then they slam on their brakes, and you end up hitting them, rear-ending them. Well, you're responsible for the speed you were driving in that sort of space. So our environment is always changing around us. And when it comes to the consequences of your decisions, think about just a hot take that you post on social media right now. on something you don't even have time to really understand what it is you're responding to, but something that really makes you mad, and you want to let people know this makes me angry, or I don't approve of this thing. Then later, it turns out the situation was much more complicated, but because you posted that thing that is online available forever, even sometimes you try to delete a tweet or something like that, you could later on be accused of something you said or posted online, even though you made it out of sort of a response, a sort of emotional response, and something you don't continually support. So just saying like, well, you need to take responsibility, or you have agency, you have the ability to decide to do something or not do something. That is very often true, but there are also times when it's really ambiguous whether we actually do or not. So all of these are warrants. These are general rules that if I say like, everybody should have the freedom of speech. If I say everybody is responsible for their own actions, in the vague form like that, a lot of people would look at that and go, well, yeah, obviously, of course I agree with that. But because they're so vague, there are going to be situations where, oh, I didn't think of that. Oh, in that case, it actually would maybe cause consequences I hadn't thought of when I looked at it in the general. So warrants are necessarily general, and they're heuristics. That is, they're going to lead us to a good conclusion a lot of the time, but sometimes they won't. So that's why we don't want to let them just sort of like fly by. That's one of the reasons I had you guys listen to this. It might not seem like it has a lot to do with the other two, but what they're doing here is actually this sort of playing devil's advocate, which is what we're going to get to in the other two readings. So the second thing I wanted you to read was this article. It just came out, I think last week, maybe a couple weeks ago, by Caitlin Flanagan, with the very provocative title, especially when it's assigned in a college class, that colleges are lying to their students. They aren't teaching you how to think. And the first thing she identifies, she gives a scenario of like, imagine you're touring college campuses, and you may have known immediately you wanted to go here, but you may have had several schools you wanted to go to. You may have visited a couple of those campuses, may have taken tours when you went there. But she gives the example of taking the tour at one college campus, and the tour guide says, you know what sets our college apart from other colleges is our professors don't tell you what to think, they teach you how to think. Oh, there's one of those warrants. Like, of course, this is what we really want. A lot of the knowledge that I could be teaching you, that your other classes could be teaching you, a lot of that's going to be obsolete by the time you graduate. So it's more important to teach critical thinking skills. And you probably have some other professors that told you at the beginning of the semester, we're going to learn critical thinking skills. And you may, if they stop to define what that is, you might have gotten one definition in one class and then go to another class and get a completely different definition. But yeah, it sounds good saying that we're not teaching you what to think, we're just teaching you how to think. But then she gets to the next college and they tell her the same thing. At this college, what makes us different is we don't teach you what to think, we teach you how to think. And each of the guides seems to think, this is what is unique about us. This is this clever, way of thinking that is that really shows we're good at critical thinking when it actually does the opposite. By repeating something that you think is original, you're actually kind of showing that, like, no, I was given this platitude, this generalization that you can interpret in a really good way, but you could also say, well, what exactly does that mean? And I might not have a really good definition for that. Now, we've heard this before when you read William Deresiewicz. One of the first things he said, or actually one of the first things, it was, in that article, why college, that came from his book, Excellent Sheep. He said the first thing that college is for is to teach you to think. But then he admits, yeah, that's a cliche. He wants to say it does mean something. It is important. It is something he goes on to try to explain what that means. But again, admitting it's a cliche means that it's easy to say without really thinking about it. It's easy to say without making it really specific and applying it to a specific situation and acknowledging that sometimes it might not apply. So back to Flanagan, she says that the truth of the matter is no one can teach you how to think, but what they can do is teach you how to think for yourself. Is that different? Anybody think of like why thinking, if you can't teach somebody how to think, Can you actually teach them to think for themselves? Yeah. Okay, so if we had like a lot of thought experiments where I would say like think about this, but I wouldn't tell you how to think about that kind of thing. Yeah, that might work. Yeah, but notice like you actually have to do the thing. So I don't even know that I could teach you how to think for yourself. I could just sort of give you, something to try. Um, and you might use that, you might think about it, or you might just like go back to thinking about something else. I'm going to test you on it, but then if I'm testing you, I'm kind of saying like, I want you to come to this conclusion, and you know, we should probably go through the like how we get from this to this conclusion. But she says something a little easier is the example from her own life that she gives. When she says, to the extent that I learned how to think for myself, it's because my father taught me, usually by asking me a single question. And what was that question? And again, this is not something specific. So this is in situations when she was younger, she would, go on a sort of self-righteous tirade about here's this thing that's just right and this thing that's just wrong, and these people are doing this wrong thing and they're just bad, and they're harming these other people who are just good. And she would just sort of go on her own, with this thing with her father listening. But then after she kind of came to a sort of case closed sort of, conclusion, he would then ask her this one question. What is that? She's given her side of the story, and she's absolutely sure the other side is wrong. But he asked her, okay, what is the best argument for the other side? Not, what kind of people are they? What sort of like terrible morals do they have because they're such bad people? Not even this sort of, simplistic, they're all wrong because they're ignorant of what the facts are. No, what is the best argument for the other side? And that is the one that she says is such an infuriating question, because she's this whole time been in soldier mindset. She says the other side, the whole point of the argument was to destroy the other side. I was there to illuminate and then devastate the other side by engaging deeply with the worst it had to offer. In other words, find the weaknesses in the other side and, sort of zero in on those weaknesses and destroy the other side by, targeting those weaknesses. And what her father's asking her to do is the opposite. Find their strengths. Deal with like the best part of that argument. Let's say those weaknesses, let's say there's some like, missing facts that they need to take into account, or there's some like, morally reprehensible warrant underlying it. You might point that out, but then what are the good parts about it? Once you take that out, what is left? There's probably something else there. Otherwise, people wouldn't be, following that. So he's trying to put her in scout mindset. We're not making an argument in her father's view. We're not making the argument to destroy the other side, to sort of, as soldiers fighting for our conclusion and trying to destroy the opposition. We're trying to learn. We know a lot about our side, but we don't know a lot about the other side because we haven't stopped to look. But if you're in scout mindset, if you're trying to figure out the best possible answer, then that means, you put together the facts that support your conclusion, but you also deal with the anomalies. That is the facts that don't quite support it, that make you rethink, well, wait a second, how does this fact fit in? You think about the general inferences, the warrants that lead from the facts you gathered to your conclusion, but you might also want to think when those inferences might not be the right ones. So, freedom of speech is great, but what about when everybody's talking at the same time and nobody can actually hear each other? We're all exercising our freedom of speech, but we're never being heard. So just think of like, okay, I'm pretty sure this warrant is a good one, but is it ever not a good one? Acknowledge that. Then come to a qualified conclusion. Qualified means like under certain conditions, this conclusion would be accepted, but under some conditions, I would say don't accept it. And you deal with the opponent's argument by figuring out what facts support their conclusion. And you might also point out facts that don't, and that might be the facts that support yours, but you're gathering both, not just the facts that contradict theirs, but the facts that support it as well. And looking at the inferences that they're using to lead to their conclusion. And there also might be situations in which those warrants don't actually lead to that conclusion. And then stating their conclusion in a qualified way. That is, this is one of the things we tend to overstate somebody else's conclusion by exaggerating it to the point it sounds ridiculous. But the opposite of that is saying like, okay, they want this thing under certain conditions. Like when the podcasters say like, well, maybe freedom of speech isn't something that we want in all situations. You could easily say, oh, they want to take freedom of speech away from people and have everybody censored. Well, no, that's not what they said. So the qualified conclusion was, in some instances, freedom of speech might be curtailed. So, but that's a good scout mindset formula for figuring out, using arguments to figure out the best description of what's going on. But what Flanagan was doing, at least her younger self that she's describing, was actually in soldier mindset, and her argument was built on confirmation bias. Let me find the information, the facts that confirm my foregone conclusion and ignore all the ones that don't. And because somebody else is out there, putting facts that might be a problem, that might challenge my conclusion, I'm biased to try to get rid of that person, get rid of that whole argument, say why we shouldn't listen to that person at all. So I don't have to deal with the facts. Let me just sort of portray this other counter argument in a way that will allow me to just like skip what the difficult facts they're putting in front of me. And that strategy, misrepresenting the other side, is what we're going to call a straw man argument. And this is defined, all this text comes straight from Shane Parrish's, the Farm Street blog, Bad Arguments and How to Avoid Them article. And Parrish defines it this way: a straw man argument is a misrepresentation of an opinion or viewpoint that's designed to be as easy as possible to refute. Just like a person made of straw be easier to fight with than a real human. Now, the early like straw man, this is referring to, came from like archery targets. So imagine you're learning to shoot a bow and arrow. This is back in the Middle Ages when, let's say, you're Britain and you're about to go to war with France in the Middle Ages, and France has a lot more money. They've got a lot bigger army. They got a lot more cavalry. They got a lot more knights with really metal armor on these giant war horses. And Britain's got a few knights on horses with armor, but they have a lot of other people that we're looking for a way to get them to be able to take on that bigger army. And one of the strategies was the Welsh longbow. That was this bow that could shoot an arrow from really far away, and you could learn to use it really accurately, and it would do a lot of damage, even potentially piercing armor. The thing is, you have to get all these people who are farmers and tradesmen and people that have these other careers. They have to learn to use this bow. So you want to teach them to shoot a target, that's relatively close, and they get good at that, and then move the target back, and they get good at that, move the target back. And you can imagine like the archery targets are like a big circle. They have like a circle within that and a circle within that. That might help when you're starting out, but is that going to prepare you to shoot at other soldiers on the battlefield? Other soldiers on the battlefield might not be quite that wide. So we can narrow it down to it's about soldier size, and that's going to help. But is there anything that this straw man right here, or that a regular soldier can do that this straw man cannot do? Yeah, that's the thing about soldiers. When you're shooting at them with a bow and arrow from a long way away, they tend to move around. So that target's going to be of limited use if you actually want to get better. Now, because Shane Parrish is using the example of fighting with, we do have Bob here. You'll see this in almost every martial arts dojo. Bob standing for body opponent bag. And Bob's a big dude. I mean, look at the muscles on that guy. Got a big old jaw. He looks scary. And so if you want to practice hitting, something close as possible to actual human face, Bob's got a face. Bob's got big torso. So you can practice, this is what it's like to hit a person to an extent. Is there anything that your average opponent in a martial arts face-off would have that Bob does not have? Yeah, the arms tend to come in handy in boxing or other martial arts. Yeah, kind of hard to box if you don't have arms or legs, and you just kind of stand there. He's all muscular, but those muscles aren't actually moving any limbs, and so it's pretty easy to train with Bob and feel confident hitting a big dude like that. And yet you're not actually getting much better. And look at the guy that's hitting him here. If that guy hit you like that, or if you were about to step in the ring with that guy, would you put money on yourself as about somebody who's about to win that fight or not? Why? Does this guy know how to throw a punch? How do we know? Look at what. So imagine he punches you. Imagine, this is Bob's jaw right here, and he's fully extended, and his knuckles are like right there. I mean, I'm hitting like uh, a projector screen and offering zero resistance, and yet I can't really do much if I'm fully extended. And look at his legs; he's just sort of standing there. If Bob was to even like breathe on him, he'd fall backwards. He's not ready to catch himself. He's not ready to step back. He's not ready to dodge. And he doesn't have any power because your power in a punch doesn't come from your knuckles. It comes from your back foot. It starts on the ground. It goes all the way through you. And then that way you have to step into the punch. Plan to put your knuckles a couple of inches past whatever you're planning to hit. That guy doesn't know that because he's just been fighting with Bob this whole time. Bob hadn't hit him back. He's also not defending himself. He's got his arm down here. And you want to pretend like you're actually talking on your cell phone, have your hand up here when you're punching with that side, because while you're focusing on your punch, the other guy's punching you. He's not just standing there like Bob with no arms. So you definitely need to block. So yeah, a straw man or a weakened, artificially weakened opponent is not going to help you. It might, if somebody doesn't know the difference, if somebody thinks, oh wow, he's hitting that punching bag, he must be a really good fighter, that person probably doesn't really know how to throw a punch either. So this guy might fool them, but he's not going to last very long in an actual sparring match. So misrepresenting our opposition might seem like an easy path to victory. In fact, it might make us feel good. It might make us maintain our feeling of closure because I could dismiss this other argument without actually stopping to think about it. But the argument didn't go away. It's just I'm not dealing with it. I'm just sort of pretending it's something that it's much weaker than it really is. And like Parrish says, it might seem similar to an outside observer who also doesn't know much about that other person's argument. But how long is that going to last? What if your audience actually does hear the other argument? They're going to go, wait a second, that's not what the other guy told me. This is actually a pretty good argument. You're only sort of like delaying this realization that your audience is going to say, actually, you might have a good argument, but you don't know what his argument is, and that's why you don't know that his argument is actually better than yours. And it might not be better than yours, but you want to be able to deal with the best version of it. Of like a straw man argument? Well, it's when we get some examples of in the Dreyfus Affair in Julie Galef's Scout Mindset chapter where if Dreyfus was making the argument that the German army is much more prepared for battle than we think they are, and somebody took that and said, well, he just thinks that because his only reason for thinking that is because he likes the Germans better. But his actual reason for thinking that was based on, some other data, some other argument, but we don't know what it is because we don't get that from that. But you could see why that would actually make sense. That conclusion would be one that you would actually want to know, why is he saying that? We as an army need to know that. When the handwriting expert that looks at Dreyfus's handwriting and looks at the spy letter says that they don't match, the prosecutor said, oh, well, we don't want to listen to him because the real reason he's saying that is because he works for these Jewish guys that control the banks, and Dreyfus is Jewish. So they're presuming that the handwriting expert's decision came from his affiliation with a minority ethnicity, when his argument probably came from just analyzing the handwriting. So when we take somebody's conclusion and we oversimplify it or overstate it, and we misrepresent the argument that led them to that, we're not dealing with the actual argument. So, Parrish points out here that, look, if I'm going to make my own argument, I'm going to want to summarize the other argument, but you can summarize the other argument without making it look ridiculous. You can summarize the other argument without making it look like it was based on some morally bad sort of assumptions. Especially, if we don't state our warrants, which we frequently don't, other people might assume, oh, your warrant is just, this is one that if you see like people online complaining about the sequels to like Star Wars and Indiana Jones and the new Marvel movies, They'll say like, look, the Star Wars sequel trilogy just wasn't as good. They're like J.J. Abrams and what's the guy that did the middle one? Like they just don't understand the source material, that kind of thing. Well, other people would say, oh, well, you're just misogynistic because it's got a female protagonist. That's the only reason you don't like it. So they're not actually listening to the argument of like, here's why the sequels don't fit the material they're drawn from, why they get things wrong. But instead of listening to that argument, other people say like, oh, well, you're just a bad person. You're just a racist or a misogynist or, homophobic or something like that. Which, if that was their actual argument, if it was like, I don't like the new Star Wars movies because they have a female, that would be a bad argument. But that's not the actual argument. And by sort of making that assertion, other people that are, I suppose, trying to defend the quality of the sequels aren't actually dealing with the specific points that these other guys are making. Does that make sense? Well, if you're using irrelevant points in somebody else's argument in order to like to make, what's that? Well, that's assuming that their opponent gets to respond. Like if this is a debate, and I get like some time and I describe my opponent's position, well, then it's my opponent's turn and he gets to say, no, that's not my position at all. When we're writing, we kind of have a little bit of delay there. We can represent the other position, and the same goes with, posting a video or something like that. And our audience might not ever check to see what that other argument is. So we might get away with that for a little while. But if they do, then they're going to realize like, oh, wait, the other argument actually is more complicated than that. And so we do actually want to give credit. We want to sort of summarize that other argument without going into so much detail that we don't have time to make our own argument. But if we make that summary unnecessarily simplistic to make it look ridiculous or to make it look like morally bad, then we're producing a straw man argument. Huh? No. So you're going to make your argument, and then you're going to analyze the other person's argument, but you want to be honest about what that argument is, which means you need to actually listen, read. So this is one of the things we're going to start doing, like starting with the discussion forum this week. I'm going to ask you to start to sort of pick an argument that you want to make about the issue about college, that you're interested in. But I'm also going to ask you to make the other argument. So when it comes to something like tuition, I can definitely support you if you think like tuition should be lower. And you can make an argument for why tuition should be lower. Inflation has gone up much higher than tuition has gone up much higher than inflation has. But yet, people still are having to like, work more jobs, pay more bills and that sort of thing. Because income has not kept up with inflation. So, our income is not going up very high, but our tuition is going up really high. So there's good arguments to make why tuition needs to be lower. But you need to be honest and figure out why tuition is the way it is. And I'm talking to some of my, fellow professors who are working on the faculty senate with the budget office and that sort of thing, so I can find some better resources for like here at KMSCC, why, where the budget goes, like specifically like what new measures get passed, where that money's going. But you're going to need to know why the money is what it is. This is not a profit-based industry, so it's not like there's some CEO who's like collecting all the extra tuition money that's left over. Because all that money is going somewhere, you're going to need to find out, well, why is tuition as high as it is? And I'm going to try to help you do that, but that is something we have to deal with before we can say tuition needs to be lower. I agree, I would like it to be lower, but it's there for a reason. I don't really know exactly, all the reasons, so I need to find those out before I presume that my argument is better than the people who are setting the tuition. And I also don't want to say like, oh, because greedy people are keeping all our tuition money or something like that. That would be definitely a straw man argument. Now, a similar version of this is also soldier mindset. It's also disconfirmation bias, but is what's called a hollow man argument. And that is sometimes there are arguments there that I say like, well, those people or some people are saying this, and I'll just create a really like terrible argument that sounds awful to everybody, precisely because nobody's actually making it. Like if I wanted to dismiss the zombie values argument that says, well, sometimes freedom is, we can't democratize everything. We can't make everything available to everybody all the time. If I wanted to say, well, some people are saying that democracy is bad and we should get rid of it. The thing is, like, they didn't say that, and I haven't heard anybody else say that. Like, I mean, even like dictators are at least pretending that they're in control of a democracy, you know. So they're tacitly acknowledging that, like, yeah, democracy is good. Nobody's out there saying we need to get rid of democracy. So by saying that there's an argument out there that's not actually out there, that might sort of make my position look really good and make the rhetorical situation look like it has a lot of exigence. Like, it's really important. We need to pay attention to this right now because somebody's trying to take democracy away. But nobody's actually making that argument that the democracy is bad. Or if they are, I need to like show a source. Like, oh, look, here's a source, somebody that is actually making this argument, so I can actually know what that argument is rather than just sort of making it up. I assume that it's this, you know. But it's basically like, you know, there's this devil out there, and you need to like come believe me, otherwise that devil argument's going to get you. Now the opposite of this. Now Parrish doesn't have what he calls an Iron Man argument, which I'm not including in here just because it sounds too much like the next one, which is a Steel Man argument. And I think it's just the wrong metaphor, because what he describes it as an Iron Man argument is more like, I would call it like an airman argument. Like, it's an argument that's made so vague that you can't actually like disprove it, or, you know, there's no substance to actually, you know, it might call it a shadow man argument. It's like boxing with a shadow or something. There's nothing that's actually there. There's just sort of a conclusion with no argument behind it that somebody's just sort of continually like redescribing to sort of prevent it from being disproven. But what we want to do, what Caitlin Flanagan's father was asking her to do by saying what is the best argument for the other side, is what Parrish identifies as a steel man argument. That is, like, I want to create the best version of an argument against my position. So that means I want to find the best person who's like writing an op-ed or, you know, making a speech that's like a really good like attack on my argument. And if nobody's actually making a very good, you know, argument against mine, then I need to do that. I need to come up, I might need to like look at a bunch of other people's arguments and sort of put together like the best parts of all of theirs in order to see like what the best reason to doubt my conclusion is. That's why I throw this picture up there. Instead of fighting Bob in the body opponent bag, Conor McGregor and Hafthor Bjornsson got together one time, and, you know, Conor's a lightweight, but he's got speed on his side. Hafthor, you know, could smash his skull. He was the Mountain in Game of Thrones. World's strongest man, like 6 times. They, like, neither one of them really knows how well they're going to do. I mean, Conor acts confident and everything, but, you know, they're both taking a risk by getting in there and even just sparring with each other. So if you seek out like the best possible opponent, that is because you're genuinely trying to improve yourself, your argument, your understanding of the situation. That's what Flanagan's father was asking her to do. After she'd put together a really good argument, presumably for one side, like, now all of that energy you just put into making an argument, go do that for the other side as well. And you might still stick with this. This isn't like a both sides are equally good. It doesn't say like find an argument for the other side that is just as good as the argument for your side. All it says is find the best possible argument for that other side. Yours might still be better, but you're not gonna prove that your side is better by, you know, pretending the other side is weaker than it really is. All right, so for next time, you're gonna read an argument for free speech, especially specifically on college campuses. It's going to introduce like some of the stuff that's been going on at higher levels at universities and other parts of the country. I'll kind of like go over that briefly on Friday, but then I want us to talk about that like free speech thing. Like, are there things that it's okay to say on a college campus? Are there things that's not okay to say? Are there times when it's not okay to say something, and that kind of thing? And just like the sort of zombie values that the podcasters talk about, there's not going to be a 100% answer either way. We're going to have good arguments on both sides, I hope. So be thinking about what you would say as you read the op-ed for Friday. All right, let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, I'll see y'all then.